All right, so welcome everybody to yet another installment of Open Game Data Open Office Hours. And I'll just do a brief introduction and then we'll hand it off to who our presenters are this week. So the Open Game Data community is, we are an NSF-funded research incubator, bringing together a collection of researchers who are interested in data generated in and around games to advance our scientific understanding of thinking, learning, and decision-making. And so we have two primary goals as part of this project. One of them is to compile a collection of resources and best practices on how to use data in and around games to better understand different sorts of human psychological phenomena and sort of advance the field of methods there. And then the second one is eventually to build real infrastructure and sort of shareable best practices and technology so that the field can do this kind of work together better. We have a lot of resources already. So this Open Game Data website is hosted by David Gagnet's team and shows some examples of kind of a vision of where we'd like to go with this sort of work. And we're looking to add more and more games to that collection. We also have a Slack where we talk and chat and sort of set up these office hour sessions as well as share resources. And then these open office hour sessions themselves are a place for people to provide examples of work in progress, how they did things, what they're thinking about, and get feedback and ideas. So for how these sessions are going to work, they're kind of based on a model of this series of sessions that the Statistical Education Research Group at CMU used to do, where a person could present, usually a student or a postdoc, on some project they were working with, and then one of the stats faculty would sit there and just publicly workshop with them as if they were sitting in office hours of like, did you consider this, or what about this other idea, or where could you go with that? And it was super valuable to sit in the audience of that and just get so much knowledge about how professionals think about this space. And so what we're going to do is hand off some time to the presenters. They'll talk about a project, and then open up the floor for the community to sort of bring up ideas or ask questions and clarifications. The sessions are recorded pending presenter approval. So Jose, are you good with recording?
Yes.
Great. And they'll be shared to the community afterwards.
Manuel maybe can give consent as well because he will be also
yeah, no problem.
Great.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
And so some things to keep in mind, presenters are often going to be showing work that's in progress. So things might not be totally done. There might be some things that might look like mistakes or things they might not have considered yet, and that's totally fine and expected. Our goal is to help them make progress on their project and move things forward to accomplish their goals, and that these sessions are about learning for everybody involved. So if you don't understand something that somebody brought up, have a question you want to ask as a clarification, feel free to just raise your hand. You can use the in Zoom thing, and I'll sort of moderate if you want to follow up. And with that, I will hand it off to Jose and Manuel. Once I find my stop sharing button, there we go.
Should I share Manuel or?
Yeah. Okay. Can you see the presentation, Jose?
Yes.
Okay. So do you want to start?
Okay, yes, I will start. So we will present you, we will introduce ourselves in a second, but we will talk first about one of the core PhD thesis goals of Manuel, which has been on interoperable game-based assessment. That has been one of his focuses. And then afterwards, I have a couple of slides, I think 2 or 3 slides about other projects that we perform in the context of game-based assessment and also, more generally speaking, serious games. To share some ideas, and maybe you can also share ideas, and maybe you would be interested in collaboration along these lines. Next.
Okay, so my name is Manuel Gomez. I am a third-year PhD student at the University of Murcia. I am a computer science engineer, and I also completed my master's degree in big data technologies. And although my PhD is focused on the game-based assessment area, I have also worked with distributed systems, with natural language processing, and generally data analysis in different educational contexts.
And in my case, I'm an associate professor at the University of Murcia. I have diverse experience in different universities. I did my PhD in Madrid at the University Carlos III of Madrid. Then I did a postdoc at MIT. I came back here to Spain. I was also an associate professor at the Complutense University of Madrid. At the University of Edinburgh, I've moved across different companies and universities. I currently teaching mostly about computer science and artificial intelligence, and in terms of research, one of the focuses is game-based assessment. We're also working on other parts of serious games, like we're starting, for example, work on serious games for artificial intelligence teaching and other topics. More generally speaking about learning analytics, in some cases multimodal learning analytics, for example, in the context of serious games as well. We're also working on cyber ranges for cybersecurity training, which are virtualized infrastructures for cybersecurity training and also disinformation. And all of this is in the context of a big lab here at the University of Murcia, which we call the Cyber Data Lab, that we have started some years ago and is growing importantly in the last years. And the topic today, if we go to the next slide, will be, as mentioned, on game-based assessment as a service. That's the whole idea. We did, I think this was the first literature review on the topic of game-based assessment that was published in IEEE Transaction and Learning Technologies. Here we have insights regarding the current status of game-based assessment. For us, one of the main insights was that maybe not the major, but one of the biggest problems in the area was that everything is performed ad hoc based on the game-based assessment environment. So you have your game, you design your game from scratch, you start collecting data, and then you build an assessment machinery fully ad hoc to your game. And of course, if you have a new game or a new environment, you need to repeat the same process all over again, which results in an incredible investment of time. And of course, that doesn't scale if you want to build an infrastructure and so on. So in this context, we wanted to explore what options we have for interoperability. And in this case, the open data project that David started at that point, I remember I met David some years ago, and he mentioned this open data dataset. Was a perfect environment to collect data from different sources, different games, and then to explore the possibilities to have interoperable game-based assessments. So in this case, we focus on a direction that has been used widely in other domains, which is the use of ontologies to provide a middleware or a middle point to integrate knowledge and knowledge representation. And we didn't only want to have this idea of the ontology to provide this representation layer, but we also wanted to analyze how this could work from a service perspective. So we deployed the environment thinking about the idea of game-based assessment as a service. We've seen this as a service paradigm in many domains. And we wanted to analyze the viability of doing the same in the context of game-based assessment. So we developed a full API and a specific infrastructure to do so. And the last step was to validate this framework that we developed, particularly with games and open data from the field day. And that is what Manuel will tell you up in more details. Feel free also to stop us if you want to mention something or discuss something. There are multiple technological areas or multiple technologies. So if you want a clarification in anything, feel free to stop Manuel and he can explain.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, if you're not familiar with ontologies provides us with an alternative way to represent elements, concepts, and relationships within a certain knowledge domain. So they are in some way similar to classic UML class diagrams that we already know, but ontologies are specifically designed to facilitate data integration, to unify different data sources by providing a common semantic framework. This could be a very basic example of an ontology in a movie domain. So we will have a thing which would be like the parent class. Then we have the movie concept, a person, and a script. Then we have thriller and drama, which are the types of movie, actor and director, which are persons. And then the relationship between the different movies and the different actor, director, and scripts. So just a very basic example of what an ontology is. This is the methodology that we followed to build our game-based assessment ontology. We have three big stages. In the first stage, we collected all the literature and analyzed it. And then once we have all the literature analyzed, we go into the development stage, in which we implement and conceptualize all the information. And then this is an iterative process in which we checked if the ontology met our objectives or not. And once the ontology met our original objectives, then we can go into the post-development stage. This is the core concept dictionary that we built from all the different sources of knowledge. We see important concepts in the game-based assessment area and possible synonyms, such as game event, game achievement, unit of play, which is a synonym for level, attempt, game session, and so on. And then we also specified a binary relation table specifying the relationships between each pair of concepts. So for example, we see the relationship between a game session that has one or more attempts and the attempt which is from one and only one game session. This is the graphical representation of our complete ontology. You can see many different concepts and all the different relationships. You can check also all the details in this paper, which was published a week or 2 weeks ago. You can see, for example, the concept of user, which is part of a user group, a user which plays attempts, then this attempt is playing on a certain level, which is played on a certain scenario. Also, this level is from certain game, and so on. Okay, so all the concepts and all the relationships identified in the literature. So once we had our ontology developed, our objective was to build a framework to support interoperable metrics using the ontology. So we wanted to unify all these different data sources, all these different log event files from different games into a common semantic knowledge model, which is our ontology. We established a set of 5 different requirements. The first requirement, which is the semantic layer, is already accomplished by our developed ontology. Then we also wanted our framework to be able to process large-scale data. We also want to perform interoperable assessments. We want to calculate different metrics between different games. Then we also want to establish an easy communication with external data sources, integrating a service API and also enabling users to interact with our framework as a transparent service and enabling this part of as a service of our research. And then finally, we also wanted to ensure privacy, authentication, and authorization with different users, different roles, different permissions, and ensuring that each user has access only to the appropriate data. This is the complete framework architecture that we developed. We have different modules. The first module is the preprocessing module right here. In this first stage, we transform all the original game data from the log event files using Python. We transform it to ontology-based data, which are RDF or XML files. And then this result is used by the analytics, inference, and query module. Here we use Spark, which is a big data processing engine. And then we also use an inference module in which we can define rules, custom rules, to infer even more information that we originally had. And then once we have all the information, we use the query system to implement our metrics. Our metrics can be stored in different formats using databases or different data format files. And then we have the service API in which clients can interact with it, either to query the metric results or to deposit data and then be analyzed and processed and so on. So to validate our framework, first we wanted to replicate some literature metrics, which are usually very basic, such as the number of events, the number of completed levels, total time spent, and different completion times. And then we also designed some more complex metrics, such as persistence or play styles, in which we used machine learning and specifically a clustering-based approach that group players based on different subfeatures. We also ran some experiments. For these concrete experiments, we use 5 different games from the Open Game Data Repository: Crystal, Balloon, Cycle Carbon, Magnet, and Waves. With these dataset sizes, I think, if I remember well, that each dataset or each file was from entire month, data from an entire month, but in some cases, from some games, they are from more than 1 month. So they are big dataset sizes. So we ran our experiments in a cluster of 6 nodes with 1 master node and 5 worker nodes. We ran our experiments increasing first the number of workers and also the dataset size gradually. And then we see that the optimal configuration is from the 4 worker node configuration. We get almost the same result as using 5 worker nodes, but saving these resources. And the key point here is that we are able to compute 2 million events, which is a very big amount of events. Also computing 6 different metrics in about 32 or 33 minutes, which is a very good result comparing it to classic data science approaches that we were previously using. So we also built 2 different use cases to illustrate how this framework could be used in real scenarios. The first use case is an interoperable dashboard in which you can log in with your credentials, and then you have here a sidebar with different options. You can, for example, upload your own data. I have here different game data files from the Open Game Data Repository from different games, also different data format options. And then once you have uploaded your file, you can see here the preview, and then all the processing starts on the background. Then once all the metrics have been computed, you can select in the sidebar any of the metric tabs. You have selection boxes for all the different games, so you can check any game that you have or that user has access to. You also can select different groups, different users. You can see here, for example, levels of activity metric, which shows very basic statistics about each user. And then you have here more examples about more metrics. Here, for example, the levels of difficulty metric, showing a general difficulty measure computed for each level in the game played based on different subfeatures. And yeah, and then some more examples. And then the second use case, would be a student report. I think I have it here, the complete report. Yeah. So this report is also generated automatically by the framework. So you can see here this report has been generated for instructor with username, blah, 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 and you have information from these groups and from these games. So you have here some information, general information about the group with different statistics. Also here some levels that could be problematic based on the abandon percentage. Here's some more visualizations, and then a more specific report about each student individually with more statistics, and then some more visualizations with different metrics. Okay, José, should I stop sharing?
Yes, we can stop here.
Okay.
Yeah. To see if we have more questions about this topic, and then we can mention other projects that we have conducted. Yeah.
So if anybody has questions, feel free to raise a hand or something. I can ask one in the interim. On your ontology graph, I was kind of curious to see how it didn't seem like there was a link between like user and learning outcome. Like it was mediated by attempt. So users can't have learning outcomes, I guess. At least that's what it seemed like to me. Maybe I'm misreading this ontology graph, but is that correct? A correct read of the graph, whether or not it's a correct read of the ontology.
So you mean that the user can have learning outcomes?
Yeah, like to some extent, like a goal of a lot of learning analytics or educational technology systems would be for users to have outcomes. And so it's kind of curious to me that there is no direct connection between a user and a learning outcome.
So there is sort of a hierarchy. So that means that if an attempt is associated to a user and another learning outcome is associated to an attempt, all those learning outcomes are also associated to that user.
Okay.
Yeah, good point.
And then similar with playstyle.
Yeah, similarly. It's not like a direct link, but yeah.
So attempt here is kind of the almost like sort of the root or like the highest network centrality, if you think about it that way. Like most things are mediated by attempts.
Yeah.
Wow. So this work is so exciting to me. So I'll start there. It is so exciting. So the fact that you were able to calculate metrics, or I think we've had this, we call them features usually, but across all these games, and that you have one set that makes sense, that unlocks the ability for us to come up with common visualizations and to continue growing this set of ontological, words. So the overall idea is just so exciting to me. I have a couple questions that come to mind, I guess. Right? So I can't imagine that the work would ever be done. So it seems like this graph is a living graph. It's like every new game that you try to fold in, some of them will fit immediately and naturally, and then some of them will make you think about things slightly differently. And I'm curious, and I know you've already done this much work, but can you imagine how the meta process about this process, which would be how does this work live over time? Do you have thoughts on that yet?
So I can try to answer that, Manuel.
Yeah, okay.
So basically, the idea of ontologies is that they're completely living entities that they can get adjusted to new knowledge because the objective is to represent knowledge. So if you receive new knowledge, that means that you can adjust the ontology. I'm not sure if the methodology that we followed, if you go to the previous, the initial page of it was metontology, right? It was this methodology was called
it was an adaptation, but yeah.
Yes. I'm not sure if there was a specific part of maintenance in the last part that would explain how this maintenance is performed. But this is definitely a living entity. So if we have new knowledge because a game is not appropriately fitting this ontology, we would be able to readapt the ontology to fit the new knowledge. Definitely.
Yeah, and also
we don't
ontologies
have a process yet to do so.
Yeah, and ontologies are very flexible in that sense. So
yeah.
I can say one of the places that we've struggled the most has been around the thing that you're calling scenario and unit of play and attempt. And it's like most of the things, I think we've done, maybe 20 games so far. And I think all of them they've pretty much all made sense, except for two. And I'm curious how you think about these. One of them was Wake has the problem that the there's a quest or a job or a level that makes sense. It has a beginning, and then you do things, and it has an end. But it also has the idea of a task, which you can only know if they were doing a task once it had been complete, because there wasn't a sequence to the task, and they never start the task. So every job says, go figure this out. Here are some of the things you might want to do. And what you might want to do are getting checked off once certain requirements are completed within the game system. But you have to, whenever we do analysis, the task is always retrospective. We have to say, well, they completed the task, so what were the things they did before it? So that was one problematic structure. And then the second one was in Lakeland, where there wasn't a level progression, there only was achievements. So it's similar in that you're playing in this world, and then every once in a while we pop up a prompt that says, oh, you completed a thing we cared about, but we didn't tell you we cared about it, and you never told us you wanted to try to do that. It just happened. So I'm curious if you have thought at all, or if, because that seems really central, like what is someone doing and what is the unit of analysis? I was curious if you've thought at all about those retrospective units of analysis and if they're compatible with this.
Yeah, you have to more or less in each game interpret what is a unit of play or what is an attempt. So I remember using game data from Lakeland, and if I remember well, I think I treated each game session as an entire attempt. So we did not have like unit of plays, just
Okay.
only one.
Yeah.
Only one unit of play, one attempt, and then everything goes inside there. So it depends on the game.
But definitely there would be room for improvement if we
Yeah.
take many more games, and we talk with the game designers, they could interpret this better, because we just had some time for Manuel to play the games and try to fit the mechanics into this ontology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And just a follow-up question, and then Jesse's hand is up still. Is there affordance for, like you were saying, that maybe someone would want to reinterpret or have a different interpretation of what a unit of play meant in Lakeland? Is it possible to have those kinds of, like, for a specific game, have a branch and potential interpretation of unit of play, or would the ontology need to afford like multiple interpretations of unit of play in some way, if that makes sense?
Oh. Parallel ontology, is it a thing?
Yeah. Or ontology through interpretive frame or whatever. I don't know.
I think that it would be probably flexible, because it's depending on the interpretation that you do, then you will see the metrics adapted to that interpretation. One thing is that the interpretation doesn't fit into the ontology, which would need to require a redesign, a change in the ontology. Another thing is that you interpret differently how a game would fit the ontology. But if the game can fit the ontology, then you only need to be wary of the metrics, because the interpretation might be different.
Yeah, I think that relates to where my head was going. So for some background, I am at PBS Kids, and we have over 200 some games, and only some of them are outfitted with sort of detailed log data, essentially, but we think that there's a lot of potential for developing that for our other games, but there's hundreds of them. And so like this idea of this standard framework is really exciting. And I'm wondering how different types of games fit into this. So something that we talk about with our games is that sometimes there's a very clear goal, like we want the kid to go through this process and select the right answer. Other times there's this goal of, just exploring a concept. And we think that we can still learn something from the way that kids are exploring concepts, but it's really hard to interpret like what they're doing essentially until after they've done it, but we've also not directed them what to do. So how do we do that? So like, do you think that there are different types of games, and are there different types of games that are better suited for this ontology? And is it a matter of you need to have more examples to grow the ontology to fit these potential other games? I feel like that was a big question, and you've probably touched on a little bit of it already.
Thank you, Jesse. So I would say that one thing that maybe we didn't emphasize a lot is that this ontology was designed thinking about the serious games for game-based assessment. And if we go for traditional game-based assessment, we think about the traditional maybe ECD design with evidence-centered design, which we have a task model, and the student will do the exercise and generate the evidence and so on. If we go to that traditional design, then we will probably have those units of play, we will have attempts, we have clear evidence that we can collect regarding that constructs that we want to measure. If we go maybe to more other types of serious games that are more maybe inquiry-based learning, or maybe there is not such a task model in those games, which in those cases, I think it would be harder to fit those games into the ontology than if we go to the traditional game-based assessment environment where they have a clear task model and attempts for each one of the tasks. What do you think?
I think that makes sense, right? Like, and that's something that we struggle with sometimes too when we're trying to output these games and understand how we can use them. Is like, well, what is the goal of this game? And is there something that we can actually directly assess or feel confident that we can infer something about what kids are learning or doing or what their skill levels are based off of the way the game is set up? Because so at PBS Kids, our goal is to teach kids something with the games. It's not necessarily to assess, right? Or and the play and entertainment is still front and center in our designs. So there's a lot of choices that we're kind of, as researchers, trying to say, you know, what these games can tell us about kids. There's a lot of things that we're kind of working with after the fact, after the game developers have made the game, right? And so I'm just trying to think through like how all of this can work, and thinking through also some of the different learning goals that our games have. So for example, we have a computational thinking game set that's coming out now, and it is well designed of like, it's clear what the goal of the game is, but one of the goals of the game is to get you to revise something. So thinking through also like, the goal is not to get the answer right. The goal is to understand how to change your design and what it means to revise something. And there's like that bit of encouraging you to explore different ways to do something. So it's again, just trying to think through like how our scenarios might apply to this, or like what different changes. Like maybe it's a different ontology. I don't know.
It could be possible for the ontology to accommodate in the game entity, maybe accommodate the type of game, and based on the type of game, you could adjust what are the relationships and what are the other nodes. So for example, if you can think about big types of games, puzzle game or exploratory game, or that would be also possible to have an ontology that could accommodate all that. Because you can always keep expanding your ontology, then if in the future you come with a new type of game, you can still add a new change and adapt it. So that would be possible.
This is all super exciting. My brain's just like, wow, where do I go with this?
I had a couple of questions that kind of sparked by that I think I'm kind of new to this ontological process stuff. So I'm curious if this is a thing. I remember, Jose, when we were co-editing that journal issue, like there were some discussions we were having about like, there's a difference between designing a game for assessment and designing a game for learning. And we all agreed on that. And we never went deeper as to like, but what is that difference? I wonder if doing a similar approach, but with like game-based learning games, and like putting the two ontologies next to each other and seeing like this is in both of them, this is a difference that's not in both of them, or whatever, could actually be a way to start to like nail down that fuzzy discussion that we were always having about like what is the difference between a game for learning and a game for assessment that we all feel exists but don't have specific words to articulate. And I wonder if it would be like if we just had a corpus of like, presumably we could do this with PBS Kids games, because this doesn't necessarily need student data. This just needs games. I mean, you need some data to validate that the ontology can interpret the data, but like it's more of a game interpretive
have
process.
data.
Right, but I know there's some potential shakiness around sharing. But that could potentially be really interesting as a follow-up on being able to try to articulate that difference.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And one cool thing, Jesse, that you mentioned before about the that you are not open to share data. One cool thing about this framework that we also had with all the different models is that you could query the framework without actually having the data, and because you have a common data format, if everything fits, you could query all the games at the same time without actually accessing the data itself. So it could be, deposit over there, hitting the ontology, and you could query without actually. So it would be also a privacy preserving framework.
And then I had a second ontological question, or ontological affordance question, thinking more on the sort of engineering and like developers as users side of things. This ontology is based around, can we get to game-based assessment from data? I would be curious to see if you could come up with a similar sort of ontology on the side of like, how do developers think about how games are built? Because this probably doesn't directly relate necessarily to like how I would build this in Unity. And if it were possible to do those two things, could you start to make this ontology just come out of Unity or Unreal or whatever, like built into the tool without having to instrument? If there was a way to make this mapping between like how does a particular play action ever get implemented, it would automatically log to the ontological format rather than having to be something that have to be instrumented.
Yeah, I think that if we talk with several game designers and we give this ontology, they will make many changes based on what they understand in terms of game design. This would be very interesting to see the point of view of game designers in building an ontology for what defines a game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I can stop hogging the floor. Dave, go ahead.
That's good. I'll respond to that one because I feel like I have some questions and some thoughts about that. So one way that I know we've thought about it is that the game is the game. Like certain things actually happen and certain things can be described. And when we think about the kinds of events that a game can send, I think about that in a pure way, that there is some objective reality to what happened, what choices were made, what was put on screen, how the system responded, and that I feel like at the end of the day, you can say we have described it. It is done. And we never actually get to done, but we get really close very fast. So the game sends events. And the issue with that is that the game events are, they're always very specific to the game. And while there are certainly common ones, I feel like you have to describe a game in its own language. So here's that's my first observation. And that's why I would not be excited about having Unity log metrics or features, because metrics and features are interpreted. There's a layer of logic that says, what do those things mean? And that will change all the time, where what the player did won't change. Like that really happened at that moment in time and isn't really to be debated if the logging isn't working correctly. So my question in the middle of this, and my thinking in the middle of this, is I would be really curious if let's say today we decided your ontology is version 1, let's go, everybody's on board, let's make the whole field of game-based assessment follow this ontology. We could do that, say, let's go. And then I would be really curious how we would design the coupling between any game's unique vocabulary and the mapping to the ontology. And you've already done it. So I'd be curious about creating a specification there of like what the output has to be. Like, is there a way to formalize that coupling layer, that connection layer between the unique language of a game and the inputs required to calculate these ontological features? Because I think it could be done, and I think that's a thin layer that any game could then provide and then just plug into this like very rapidly. That's my assumption. But you've done it, so I'm curious if you hold my assumption that a game event is pure, that is uninterpreted. And I'm also curious if you hold the same opinion that the translation layer of a game event into something that could be processed by an ontological metric computation, if that layer is thin, or if it actually requires a lot of logic.
I'm not sure if I can answer that question, David. Manuel, any idea?
No, the way that we solved it in this case is that we have like a common category events. So we had to define for each game like the correspondence between the specific events and then the common category that then it's going to be analyzed by the ontology.
Maybe ask a follow-up. So then the analysis for the ontology has its own ontology of the kinds of events it needs to
Yeah.
make sense out of it. Yeah, so that I think that's where we could go with that, would be if we version that, if we say version 1.0 of ontology input requires these events, and that will produce ontology version 1 metrics, then any game could become version 1 ontology compatible by simply providing their own translation into those input events. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to build that.
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of. Like we do still have to do a lot of like, well, what's the metric of interest from this game? And so in the case of the computational thinking game, like we're looking at how often are the kids revising their design and how efficient are those revisions, right? But that's like that. So I think that like event, we have that number, like outcome metric maps onto this ontology and will make sense. But you still have to do that translation, right? To say that for this game, this is the thing that's interesting.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that, you know, that's the piece that is hard to scale in our experience.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely things that apply to, we call them game-based indicators, and we have sort of common game-based indicators like active time, you know, how far they got in the game, that sort of thing. But then there's usually these game-specific indicators, which are usually, in my opinion, they're more interesting. But that was my other question, was going to be like, have you done the indicators and outputs and metrics that you have made? Have you validated them to say like how they relate to X skill that this game is supposed to be assessing? So like, how good are those shared outputs? Does active time, I believe active time was one of the outputs, does that correlate with their skill on whatever skill that game was supposed to be assessing?
No, in this case, the validation was more technological than actually focused on learning. So we took metrics from the literature, we reproduced those metrics in all those games to validate that it was working, and then we were able to output them. But we didn't do the first problem that we have is that we don't really understand completely well the context where this data was collected, and that's part of what field they did. We don't understand the games closely, only a couple of them that we were familiar with. So it's very hard for us to do that effectively. For that kind of case study, we will need to collaborate, for example, with David's lab in order for them to do the more low-level analysis to see if the metrics make sense and so on.
I think
more a technological validation.
One thing that I think you're getting at, José, that I think would be really helpful for the field would be to continue thinking about what level of analysis we're talking about. So at least with open game data, we think raw events, and then we have features, and the features can be for sessions, players, populations, or technically any way you want to aggregate. And then on top of that, we have models that use those features to say something. And then I feel like there is another layer of the analyses of those models. And so when you start saying, well, how good is the model? So you've got to look on top of that. So you can, and I'm more and more thinking that there is, maybe my approach that I said isn't correct, but I think there might be a reasonable 4 or 5 abstraction layer system that we could all agree on. And if we did that, it would help us be more interoperable.
Yes.
Because this thing would be on for calculating features, this defines the input and the output of that one layer. So technically any system of models should be able to be built on top of it, and any game system of events should be able to feed into it. So I'm really curious about developing some like file standards that exist between those. So we don't even need APIs, but it's just, if you can be I'm going to keep pushing open game data, but if you can be an open game data raw file, that means something. And if you can be an open game data metrics file, that means something. And I think it can be done. I'm very curious to take something like this and start experimenting with versioning around it so that we can start saying, if you provide these raw events, we can calculate all of these metrics and we can visualize all these metrics. But we just have to give it a name. It's like the never-ending story. Otherwise, the world falls apart. I'm so excited by this work.
Literally
nice
to
questions.
just the vocabulary and getting everybody on the same page with vocabulary would be helpful. Like even within PBS Kids, our research, and within the research team within PBS Kids, we have a hard time with vocabulary sometimes. And what do we mean by this? And what is that? So like, I would just love, I don't care who sets it up. I would love to have a common structure for vocabulary based off of something like this that, you know, makes sense for the game, right? It would just help all the communication.
There's a proposal. Why don't the people on this call co-author a paper immediately that at least lays out a reasonable approach for the different levels of game data moving through a pipeline that we all agree on, and say that was version 1.
I love it. I'm sold. Sign me up.
Raw to analyses.
And then we publish it somewhere where a bunch of other game analytics people hang out, so we can get torn to shreds, so we can make version 1.1.
Yep, 1.1 is next. It's inevitable. But if we could, for example, if we knew that you had a system that was running that could process 20 million events in 30 minutes, and all we have to do is make a file shaped a certain way for it to work, we would be compelled to make sure that we make that file. And I think that those kinds of motivation structures are what the field needs. Like I was talking with Barbara Chamberlain, who's at New Mexico State University, and they make games that are played by 4 million kids a year or something. So big impact at that university, right? For a university studio. And I loved how clear she was, where she just said, we only have, so much money and so much time. And for us to want to collaborate, we just need to see where it saves us money and time, because we care about these things, and that's our mission. And I just want to make it really easy for people to want to collaborate. It's like, how do we get everybody to a benefit to collaborate? And I think some of those standards would do it, especially if you've got a system that can process 20 million events in 30 minutes.
So I think that we are beyond time to show you other studies, so we might need to.
Yeah, that was just the question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Other stuff in a different meeting some other day.
Yeah, we got plenty of time slots. Starting in April. But yeah, so we are close to time, just for anybody who's watching the clock, and I actually have a tighter next thing today than I normally do. But just want to thank José and Manuel for sharing their work. Super, super interesting. Clearly inspired a lot of ideas. And I think we should totally follow up on some of these threads of relating this ontology to other kinds of games, finding other kinds of games that would be difficult to fit into it, or different kinds of analyses that would be difficult to fit into it, so we can figure out how it should actually be shaped, and grow.
It was our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. I'll follow up on the paper idea. I'll see if I can push that forward one idea or for one moment.
I think the trying to do it for game-based learning instead of game-based assessment and then comparing the two would be super interesting.
I agree. That's a concept. I feel like I had so many arguments with YJ about. But she would always ask, but is this game for assessment? And I would say, oh, it's not.
I know that well. That's what I make the emphasis on. This was developed for game-based assessment.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, it's not going to be a good assessment. I'm like, I don't care. That's next. That's another project. Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, thank you all. I will see you in a few weeks, if not sooner.
Thank you.
And
bye, guys.
I think it's true for
Thank
everybody
you.
here, but if you haven't joined the Slack, please do so and share ideas and maybe jump on this paper concept. I'm also in the midst of making a better landing page for this event that's not a Google Doc. And hopefully it should be easier to share around. So both the recording and stuff will be up there and people can see it, and all those other resources as well. So
Great.
thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks, or you signed up for 2 weeks from now.
Me.
David?
Presenting on the data that I'm going to collect in 3 minutes. People are showing up.
Talk about work in progress.
See ya.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you all.
Bye.